Hi, everybody. Welcome back for a special episode of the Awaken Way podcast. Why special? Because I'm on the road on the Wolf's Message Tour. And as many of you who join us weekly know, I can't always record with guests or I can't do my Q&A sessions because my schedule's so crazy or I don't have a signal. But I made sure I had a signal today so I could bring on a very special friend of mine and colleague, Stephanie James. I know her through Humanity's Team, which if you don't know about, you need to look into. But she has a book that affected me so greatly. I said, Stephanie, I don't have too many outside guests these days, but we need to get you on and let people know about your book. So I want you to meet Stephanie right now. Let's bring her on to the program. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome.
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you so much. So happy to be here with you.
Yeah, we were just together not even a month ago at Humanity's Team's Sacred Awakenings event. Yeah. And I had the chance to watch you give a beautiful presentation to the audience. I knew you're a good speaker because that's part of what you do. You're speaker, author, transformation coach, and psychotherapist. So a lot of really positive things rolled up into one. But, oh, you're also a filmmaker. So I want to talk about that at some point. But your book, tell everybody the title of it first and when it came out, and then we'll dive in. Okay.
Okay. So it's Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After.
Yeah.
And it officially launched April 15th.
Okay. Well, you didn't have that title. I love the title, Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. So it deals with this life here and the afterlife. Didn't have that title at all at first. And I know the title was given to you, wasn't it?
Yeah. So about a little over a year ago, I was interviewing Neil Donald Walsh for my show. And as he and I were getting on the screen, we just had this heart to heart connection. And it took us about half an hour, Suzanne, to get to the interview. And so during that time, as we're just laughing and sharing and talking, you see him, he just gets this download and he stops the conversation and he says, Stephanie, you're going to write a new book and you're going to start tomorrow morning. And the name of the book is going to be I'm Dying to Tell You About Death. That was the original title that you knew. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's going to have a global impact and I'm going to endorse this book.
And if I could interrupt for a second, for those of you who don't recognize Neil Donald Walsh, he's famous for selling millions of copies of his book, Conversations with God. That book changed my life probably 20 years ago when it first came out.
Mine too. And so, that was the working title for a long time. And as my literary agent started taking it to different publishing houses, they were saying, I don't know right now if anyone wants to read a book about death. Yeah. And she and I were having a conversation and kind of laughing, saying, it's not a book about death, actually. Yeah. It's really a book about life and how death is just the next chapter in our book of eternity. So as we were talking, she said, well, it needs to be a title, that really encompasses the book. And, someone that was 25 or 95 would read it and say, I want to read that book. Yeah. And so it just dropped in for me. And I just said, okay, I think it's Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After.
Yeah. And it's great. What a difference in vibe. That's so important because you have to get people past the cover, past the title. And once they start reading it, then they're hooked. I believe you first sent me the manuscript before it was even finished, looking for an endorsement, right? You knew me through Humanity's Team. Is that how we met?
No, actually, how we met was Beth Grossman.
Oh, okay.
Sweet, wonderful Beth, who's a wonderful publicist out of New York City. And so she had sent you, I think, my PDF.
Okay.
And so then you were getting ready to go on your trip and
let me tell him.
Yeah,
let me tell him.
It's so wonderful.
I read this book. I couldn't put it down. And a lot of people ask me to read their books. And today I just don't have time anymore. And it hurts me to say, I'm sorry, I don't have the time to read a book, because if I'm going to endorse a book, I actually read it. And I want those to be my words when I endorse a book. Well, I started reading it and we were getting on the road. I loved your manuscript so much. I printed every page on my printer and then got out my 3-hole puncher and I punched it through all the pages. I got a notebook. I put it in the notebook. I took it with me. I wanted to have this before it was even in print. I don't think I've ever done that before. It just carried such a high vibe, such beautiful stories about the afterlife. And you're not a medium, but you captured the afterlife. So tell everybody what inspired you to write this, and tell us what's in it.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. What's very interesting is the first two books I wrote were definitely more to like the psychotherapist that I am, kind of sharing those kind of stories. And the invitation from Neil Donald Walsh had me drop into this place where the divine was inviting me to show up sometimes 4:30 in the morning at the keyboard and just let whatever came through come through. And so what I started sharing, Suzanne, as you know, at first was just really my own story, because I have had an awareness that this isn't the end since I was a little girl. I have a very vivid memory of being about 5 years old and being in the basement. I can tell you exactly what I was looking at, my grandmother's antique dresser. And I had the very distinct thought like, oh, I don't remember being born. That's because we're never born and we never die. It was like, this just keeps going. And I just really had that insight. And that was the time too. Shortly after that, I started seeing these light beings showing up in my doorway. And I have to believe now, Suzanne, maybe they were guardian angels. And it was so interesting because then all these years later, when I was 31 and my daughter was 10, she saw the exact same angel beings, these beings at my mother's house, which was the room that I used to sleep in. So I know that there's something there. And I think too, one of the blessings was that I had a housekeeper, this beautiful, wonderful Latina woman who you would just fold into the folds of her body when she hugged you. I just loved being with her. And she would iron my father's shirts. And I'd perch on the side of the couch and just listen to her. And she would tell me stories about how she took care of my mother and my uncle in all these past lives.
Oh, wow.
So from a very young age, that just made sense to me. I never thought, oh, that's weird, or I was like, okay, because I knew B was such an honest, wonderful woman that just was like, yeah, okay.
So your BS from the beginning, your belief system was just open to this. I look surprised when you told that story. I'm sure it's in the book, but it's been well over a year, I think, since I read it. So it's like hearing these again. And I remember just reading it saying, yes, yes, but it's so cool. Didn't your own daughter have some experience around age 4?
Yes.
Besides the one you shared?
Yeah, that's such a powerful story, because even though I knew that life continued, I think like most people, I still kind of carried this fear around death. And then when my daughter Acacia was 4 years old, that fear just got blown out of the water, literally. It was a day where I was actually in the bathtub and the phone rang, and the little 4-year-old Acacia ran and got me the phone. So I'm talking to my mother in the tub. Now I always have to pause and say, my daughter Acacia, the name Acacia is immortality, the word for immortality in Greek. And it's also the tree of life in Africa. And I always say, Suzanne, I didn't know when I named her that she would be the one teaching me about immortality.
Oh, wow.
And that was this moment. When I got the phone call, my mother was letting me know that my Aunt Gwen, who had been struggling with breast cancer, had gone in for exploratory surgery that morning. And when they had opened her up, it was just all through her body. And so she said, basically they just sewed her up, and the doctors are giving her about 3 months to live. And I'm just crying there in the tub, and little Acacia wanders back in and she says, "Why are you crying, Mama?" And I said, "Oh, honey, Mama just doesn't want anyone to die." And she sits on the side of the tub and she looks at me and she says, "But we never die." And I said, "Oh, you mean we go to heaven?" And I said that because even though we didn't go to church, or didn't even really talk about heaven, I thought, well, that must be what she means. And she said, "Mama, there's no heaven." She said, "When I was up in the sky, when I was a light," she said, "when I was a light up in the sky with God." And then she pauses and she says, "Do you remember your other mother, Dorothy?" my other mother, Dorothy, was my grandmother who died when I was 13. And what interesting phrasing, your other mother, Dorothy. And
And
so,
she certainly never knew, Acacia never knew Dorothy, right?
oh no, because a year later, my grandfather remarried. So the only grandmother she knew was Grandma Seal. And so of course we just didn't even talk about my grandmother. It just wasn't even in any part of our world. And she said, yeah, your other mother, Dorothy, her light was in the sky with me. So God put some of her light with my light, and I got to come down and be your daughter.
Uh, uh, I love that story because what does everybody ask me? What if my loved one reincarnates before I get to see them? And she just told you what I'm telling you, because my guides say it all the time. The entirety of us does not reincarnate, but aspects. So your daughter is telling us that she and your grandmother share the same oversoul and bits and pieces of that same soul. Is that beautiful? This is the kind of thing that's in her book, My Big Fat Juicy Life. These kinds of stories that you want to believe, but you don't trust, but your soul knows. So as I read it, I'm just saying, yes, yes, yes. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's, and so that was for me, that part where, of course, nobody wants to die, but I didn't have all of a sudden that fear. It was like, it is okay. And exactly what you're saying, Suzanne, that really is my internal knowingness, is that aspects of ourself, exactly as you said, they come back. And it's not that that exact person is reincarnated. I remember when I was speaking with Wayne Dyer's daughter, Sage,
Mhm.
and she had this experience, actually her mother had, where Wayne had come to her during an ayahuasca ceremony.
Mm.
And she had thought, okay, well, to ask him, are you Julian? Are you Sage's son, 5-year-old son? And he had kind of nodded. And then he had said, or she had said, is he supposed to carry your work on? And then she said the image she saw was a bookcase full of his books. But then he went like this, he waved his hand and they all disappeared. And she felt like that was signifying he was not to carry on his work. He was his own person. But, Sage and I have had several conversations. And when I shared that story of Acacia and, your other mother, Dorothy, she was like, oh my gosh, I love that so much, because I have wanted to believe that Julian's his own light, that he's his own soul. And that makes so much more sense to me, that some of my dad's light is in him.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I love that you keep bringing that up. The other night I was leading my monthly webinar, the monthly connection, and somebody asked in the Q&A session, why do you often wear the necklace with the star on it? And I said, because it's a reminder of who all of us are. We are self-luminous beings, which is what a star is. It has its own light. We are all these beings of light. And you're getting these lessons from children that just validate that. We forget that as we grow older because we get so focused on this earthly life. But those are just some great examples there. You mentioned talking to Sage Dyer. I can't remember. Is she in the book?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
she and Marceline, and of course you, Ariel,
Marceline being Wayne Dyer's
wife.
right? Were they married at the time of his passing?
I believe they were separated. I don't know if they ever truly got divorced, but I know that they had not been living together for years and years and years and years. But interestingly, they had summer vacations all together. The whole family would come and stay with him in Maui for the summer. Okay. So they had a beautiful relationship still.
So you interviewed her, and that's what I wanted to move into.
Sure.
The fact that in the book, you interview quite a few people. How did you choose the people to interview, and what kind of stories did they share?
So interesting, Suzanne, too. I felt like within the other remarkable thing about that book is that it came in and downloaded a little under 6 weeks.
Yeah.
The first 2 books I wrote were 9 months each, like gestating a baby.
Yeah.
And just like you, and I think I had interviewed you for the show, and we may have I think maybe you're right, Suzanne. Maybe we met through Humanities Team, and then we kind of got to know each other because Beth sent you my book.
That's
And
it.
so, because I had interviewed you on the show on my Igniting the Spark. And
That's it.
so, yeah, that's it. And so, because of that, somehow you and I had connected, and then I had you be in the book. And that's how it started happening in that 6-week period. People were just coming out of the woodwork. And because I had also interviewed Sage, I said, hey, I feel like that story that you shared about seeing your father shortly after his death would be wonderful. And it was after our interview, she said, you've got to meet my mom. I think you've got, so she would introduce me to her mom. And like the Academy Award winner, Stephen Simon, who produced the movie What Dreams May Come. So he was good friends, is still very close friends with your new friend, Anna Dara, and my dear soul sister. And so she connected us. And that's a story I'll share because it was so powerful.
Good.
Stephen's wife was just this beautiful light, this beautiful soul. And one morning when Stephen was out doing things, he came back to the house and his 54-year-old bride had passed. And he was completely devastated.
This just happened to a dear friend of ours 2 weeks ago. Same age, husband went out, came back, and there she is. There's her body. Yeah.
Yeah. And he said, he was, of course, completely devastated. He's very, very close friends. His best friend is actually Neil Donald Walsh.
Oh.
And so he ended up, flying to Neil's and trying to just get himself together in the next 24 hours. And he said it was so interesting because about 6 weeks after her passing, he was watching a series. And at the end, he said when it would get to the credits, he and his wife, they would always turn off the show because they didn't want any preview of what was coming up next. And he said all of a sudden he heard her voice in his head, and the voice said, watch the credits.
Oh, cool.
So he stayed for the credits, and as they started going, they started playing this song. And the song, it's giving me chills so big right now. It says, yeah. It says, someday we'll be together. That song. And it was so beautiful. And he said, so from then on, he would start to experience her. And coming in, he said there was always a tell. He didn't say what that tell was, but he said there's always a distinct tell when she shows up. And so then, much like how when Neil wrote Conversations with God, he just had a yellow notebook pad and he'd ask questions and then write the answers.
Is everybody paying attention?
This is such an important thing. And and so exactly that's what he started doing with her. Name was Lauren. And so he would ask Lauren things and she would come to him. And so pretty soon, I love this story. So he was out to dinner with Neil and his wife, and he'd been writing these things down on these notebook pads. And so he says to Neil, now the important thing to know, he says, is that there was a drought during the time in Oregon, during the time that he's having this conversation in this restaurant with Neil. And he says, so he starts to tell him, I've been taking all these notes with my wife. I mean, there's just page after page after page. And he gets done saying that and lightning strikes. And then this huge thunder roll. And so they're kind of looking at each other and laughing. And Neil says to him, well, you need to make this a book. And as soon as he says that, again, the thunder. And, and they're kind of laughing, but going like, this is really wild. And then Neil said, I think the title of your book is What Dreams Have Come.
Oh, cool.
And so, indeed, he did write the book with Lauren, and the thunder kept happening. And what was so interesting, he said he went home that night and asked Lauren, he said, was that you? And she laughed and she said, I can't control the weather. I'm not that powerful, but definitely it was a sign.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's like people think, did my loved one put that song on the radio? No, but they, like you just explained, said, listen to the end, and you did. But many times we don't hear the voice say, listen to the end. We have a thought, or we just stay and we don't realize we've been inspired. So the connections are there. We just don't always notice them, which is why I like doing shows like this, because we hear these stories and we just start to say, oh, that's how it works. Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
have any interviews that really surprised you? Took you in a direction you didn't expect to go in the book?
I don't know if any of them were unexpected. I would say the one that was really just so, to me, just really beautiful and amazing, because I've been friends with Lisa Campion for quite a long time. And you know Lisa
I
Campion.
just signed her up to be a guest on the show.
Oh, I
So
love
she'll
it.
be on probably next month or so. I can't remember. I think I'm waiting till I get to another place to get a better signal. But isn't that funny? I met her at the Sacred Awakenings event with Humanity's Team as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Lisa and I have been good friends for years and years and years.
Huh.
And we both had each other on our podcast, and that's kind of how we met. So when she shared her story in the book about, I believe she was in France and they were going through this monastery. And she said they're going through a tour, a guided tour. And all of a sudden, she was like, I need to go underneath the ropes that say you cannot go to that section of the church. But she just felt guided. She had this inner knowingness, like, I have been here before. And so she snuck out away from the crowd. And she said she knew exactly where she was going. And she ended up in this monk's chamber, which
Wow.
she was very clear and had the download while she was there. Like, I was this monk, and
Oh,
I
wow.
died here.
Hmm.
It was definitely a past life regression, I guess you would say. She said she could, like, very, very clearly that these monks had to walk a mile, I think, for a sip of water. They were very, very deprived. That was part of what they practiced. And that, I think, because they had no coverings on the window, he had died of pneumonia.
Hmm.
And she said, same thing. She left there and walked right to where they had this on grounds cemetery and right to his gravestone. And she
Hmm.
said she was just there and just weeping. Yeah. And this is someone who, you've met Lisa. She is so buoyant and bubbly,
Yeah.
and it was like she just had that, again, this inner guidance, this inner knowingness. And I know you speak about this, and I speak about it as our inner GPS, that we have, that it's so important, I think, we tune into,
Yeah.
because it guides us in places like this.
Well, let's follow that thread, because you
Okay.
told a great story at the Sacred Awakenings event about why you made a recent move, following that inner GPS that you're talking about. And I know a lot of people get these hits and they're afraid to act on them. And so your story is very empowering.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, it's really remarkable in that it had only happened one other time in my life. So I have to share that for context.
Sure.
But what happened was late January of this year, I was sitting in my therapy office working with a client. And as I'm with that client, he was doing EMDR, which is a trauma protocol, and his eyes were closed. And I'm looking at him very intently. And all of a sudden, it was like, there's times where time just seems to slow down and take on a different, kind of a different feel or a different dimension. And the voice, what I call the voice that I've heard since I was a little girl,
Hmm.
said, you need to move to Santa Fe. And it was that clear.
And where were you living at the time?
Fort Collins, Colorado.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was so strong. I was like, okay, because when I had heard that same message 32 years prior to that, which was the only other time I heard that I needed to move anywhere, I was living in Denver. I was working on an adolescent psychiatric unit, and I was a single mom. And so, interestingly, I was up with a group of girlfriends. I had friends from high school and college, and then my wonderful work friends. And we were all at my aunt's second home up in Vail, Colorado, having this beautiful ski weekend. It was, just pure light, pure fun. But the night before we left, that Saturday night, Same thing. The voice came in and it was very clear and it said, you need to get out of Denver. You need to go back to Fort Collins. And, same thing. I didn't have a job. But it was so clear. I actually started crying when it
You
came
didn't
in.
have a job lined up. You had a great job.
No, I had a great job. I did not have a job lined up in Fort Collins, of course. And I always say I don't remember dates, but I'll always remember this one because it was January 14th and my lease was going to be up February 1st. So it was February 14th the next day, excuse me, because that was the 13th, because the 14th is when I called my mother and she lives in Fort Collins. And I said, Mom, I don't know what's happening, but it's really strong. I need to come home. And she said, well, this is ironic because our renter, they own several properties in Fort Collins. She said, one of our renters isn't renewing his lease. So there's a place for you.
Go figure.
No. So it was so perfect. I said, okay, I'm going to go to work tomorrow morning, Monday morning, give them my 2 weeks notice, and we're going to come home.
Oh.
And so that's what I did. And within the first,
that is a leap of faith, right? You are totally trusting this voice. You have a great job. You're moving without a job lined up because the voice is that clear and you trust it.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
Yes. Well, and so what ended up happening within the first week that I moved home, I call it home because I grew up in Fort Collins. I had a job, but what was so powerful was 3 weeks to the day that I moved home, the adolescent unit closed and all of my girlfriends were laid off work and it never reopened under that hospital name. And the front page of the Rocky Mountain News said, psychiatric abuses charged. And we had these scouts that were going out around the country, finding kids to bring into this residential treatment center. And they were getting $5,000 kickbacks. Of course, this is all super illegal. And so I would have been a single mom, just signed a lease, no job. And it would have been phenomenally stressful. Instead, it was seamless. And so when I heard this voice, Suzanne, the same thing, I knew that was where I needed to go. And I've got this beautiful community of friends here. And I've been coming to Santa Fe for the last 7 years, a couple times a year, but not once, Suzanne, not once did I ever want to live here. I had no desire. I'm like, yeah, I love my friends here. They're great, but I loved living in Colorado. And the other thing to note is my kids live in Fort Collins, my grandkids, my parents live 6 blocks from where I used to live. My cousin and his wife and their kids live right next door.
That is trust, Stephanie.
And but it was so solid once again. And Suzanne, as you know, when we're making those decisions that are in alignment, things started showing up, right away. I called the property manager that owned the office building I was renting for my private practice. And I said, I know my lease goes to the end of June, but I'm moving to Santa Fe. And the first words out of her mouth were, I'm so excited for you. We'll just consider this your 30 days and I'll give you your full deposit back. Wow. I mean, little things like that, little serendipitous things. And just finding the right place. I live in this beautiful home on 5 acres of just being in the country and having the most beautiful neighbors here. And one of my dearest friends, George and Sedina Capinelli, I told them where I was moving and she just started laughing. She's like, Stephanie, we live like 9 minutes down the road from you. We're literally just neighbors on this country road. So, and as I've been here, I have to tell you, I cannot believe, I feel like my life lesson right now, Suzanne, is learning how to receive, because the love and the community that I have been welcomed into, it's more than I've ever held before.
Wow. So I always have this sense of our Awake and Wake community listening, watching this podcast, and some people are saying, why don't these things happen to me? She has this big, fat, juicy life, and obviously things fall into her lap. Why is she so lucky? Why is she so blessed? I know the answer to this, but I want to hear from you, Stephanie.
Okay. No, I think that we all have this ability. Every single person does. I really do believe it's attuning to that and trusting it. And for me, Suzanne, I think so often what I'm talking with people about is that we get so distracted in our lives. And, we have social media, we have our phones, and we have whatever's going on, and we can get really caught out of our beingness. And it's when we can be quiet, when we can be to that still point inside of us, we can start tuning in to that same thing. You call it a star, I call it our spark. That's our internal spark. It's the same exact thing, that divine that is within us, that is us as well. We are all a part of that. And I do think that that voice is there if we'll tune in. Sometimes if we just get quiet enough. And at least that's been my experience. And so as I've really done that throughout my life, and I've been practicing meditation for about 28 years, but I'm not special. It's not like, oh, everything happens for me. I think I do listen. And the more we listen and the more we tune in, the more these things happen, and noticing the serendipities and noticing the signs. And so then I've gotten accustomed to noticing, like, oh, this message came through in a dream. Oh, when I woke up, I needed to journal this right when I got up because this is significant. And I think I just have really learned how to tune into that voice.
Beautiful. That's it. Beautiful lessons. And this is why I wanted to get you on the show, because it's not that some people are luckier than others or more blessed than others. It's that listening, attunement, presence that has become a part of your life, and trust. Yeah. I just going to do a shameless plug here for my book, Making the Afterlife Connection. It just came out this week. The subtitle is just what we're talking about, the journey from doubt to knowing. This one is that death is not the end, but what does that mean? Not just that we don't need to fear death, but that we're eternal beings. And you talked about that spark. We have a follower in Australia, Darren, who came up with an acronym, Spark of Unconditional Love. That's soul, the spark. Yeah.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah. So talk about grief, since I just brought up death is not the end. I know you talk about that in the book. What's your take on that, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah, I think it's so important, because when we talk about your big, fat, juicy life, part of what makes our life juicy is the full experience. It's not just that it's all about being happy and joyful, that sometimes we're going to be in the depths of sorrow, or we're going to be in anger, or we do experience fear. It's not being exempt from those emotions. It's literally about how we embrace those emotions.
So you get ticked off sometimes?
I do.
Okay.
I do, and it took me a long time to really allow myself to be angry, to acknowledge that, oh yeah, that's a part of me. And I would suppress that, and we talk about, a lot of times with my clients, we talk about anger as a secondary emotion because it's covering what's underneath. And so it was important for me to allow myself to feel angry at some things. And we can talk a little bit about my journey with my father, which I think has been really significant.
Yeah, I don't want to, I'm sorry about that sidetrack there. I want to get back to grief because it's so important.
No. And I do. This is a part of it. I think it's, my father passing, and my uncle just passed away about a month ago. And I was pulled into these places of deep grief. And when I brought up my father, it was because I was able to express the anger and finally get in touch with what anger had been, that, things that I wasn't happy about through our relationship. But what was underneath there was the wound, was the sorrow. And to be able to, I love, Rumi has the poem, The Guest House.
I don't know that one.
And it's so beautiful. I wish I could just pull it up on my phone really quick for us, because I'm not going to be able to articulate it all. But here's the essence of it. And it says, this life is a guest house. Every day, a new visitor comes. A meanness, a depression, a sorrow. It comes and it cleans our house of all its furniture. And it says, still, meet them at the door laughing and welcome them in. We never know which has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Gotta love Rumi.
Gotta love Rumi. And that's such a paraphrase. So I apologize to Rumi for not having that memorized, perfectly. But to me, that's it, Suzanne. because every single person is going to have their own individual grief journey, and nobody else gets to dictate that for them. So there's a beautiful book. It's actually a children's book, but I recommend it to all my clients, called Stone Soup. I believe that's right. And now that I'm saying that out loud, I'm like, is that the name? I do think it's Stone Soup. But what the dream, or what the book is about, is this woman who is making this soup, and we don't know what it is, but she's making the soup, and she's so sad, and she's obviously lost someone, and she keeps having to add ingredients and do different things. And pretty soon her friends are like, we don't want to come over anymore. You're still making that soup. Or, other people like, can you just get done making that soup? And the whole thing is, no one can dictate when that soup is going to be done but her. And so I think that's the beautiful message of the book, for all of us, is that to be with those grief journeys, it's not a spiritual bypass. It's not saying, oh, I need to be in joy. Sometimes when we're in sorrow, we have to also allow ourselves a moment of joy. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive states. And yet being able to embrace all of that is so important, because that's a part of why we're here. We're here having this human experience. So if we're really going to have a big, fat, juicy life, it's embracing all of it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And that's what I love about your book. It's not just interviews of other people. It's not just your story. It's all of that. And this beautiful teaching from your practice as a psychotherapist, from your personal insights, from your meditative practice, from your own inner wisdom, is just a big, fat, juicy book.
Oh, thank you.
Love it. I'm happy to have my own copy now, rather than the printed pages I carried around in my notebook on my cross-country trip. Talk about your dad and his passing, and any special moments that really helped you heal because of what you knew about the afterlife.
Yeah, and I wanted to share the story just a little bit because, Suzanne, you were actually a part of this. And I don't know if you remember this part in the book, but my father and I had a tumultuous relationship. But for 13 years as a little girl growing up, the first 13 years of my life, I was absolutely a daddy's girl, 100%. And anywhere he was, I wanted to be. And unfortunately, through a divorce, he left my mother for another woman. And when that happened, she was not interested in having me around.
Oh.
Even though I lived with them, I was told and I wasn't. From that moment on, I wasn't allowed to speak to my father alone. I couldn't be alone with him in a room. And until the day he died, I couldn't speak to him alone on the phone.
Wow.
So I share this because then as an adult, 6 years before he passed, I had decided, and I write about this in my book, Becoming Fierce, how to detach with love. Because this kind of emotional, it really is emotional abuse that continued throughout my life. I finally said, I have to love myself enough to stop this. And so I wrote he and my stepmother a letter, and I said, I love you both. These are the gifts you've given me. Thank you so much for all of this. This is actually also the wounds I have carried, the work I have done, the thousands of dollars I spent in therapy, really working on my own stuff. And I said, and, I dearly love you both, and please don't contact me again.
That's courage and strength.
Well, and they didn't. And so when my father passed, it was so interesting. He'd had a stroke and he was still alive. And at that point, when my brother contacted me and said, hey, Dad's in ICU, they don't expect him to live, the dreams started. And for 12 nights, Suzanne, right before he passed and right afterwards, Dad would come to me in dreams. Yeah. And some of them were it wasn't like he was handing down big wisdom. He wasn't saying sorry. It wasn't anything like that. But he would show up and we would play cribbage together. That's what he had taught me as a child, a little girl. He taught me how to play cribbage. That was our game together. And so it was conversations and things like that. And then shortly after he passed, I think one of the biggest things were all this electronic stuff started happening in our home, with lights going on and the clock changing and the date changing on the stove, and our dishwasher would pop on out of the blue. I mean, all this electronic stuff. And so fast forward, I mean, this is probably 9 months after he had passed. And I hadn't heard from him for a while. And I was just getting ready to interview you about The Awakened Way, your book, The Awakened Way. And I'm listening to it on Audible, and I'm walking my dog. And there's a point in that book where you say, you know, you can still ask them to send you a sign. You know, they can let you know they're still here. And I remember exactly where I was walking, and I took my headphones out and I said, Dad, I really am going through a hard time right now. My husband and I had just broke up. We had just separated. And I was like really needing to know he was there. And so I just, you know, it's this beautiful day and I'm just walking, and I would just pray like, okay, Dad, I really need to know you're here with me. Well, I got back home and fixed dinner, and my dog and I were snuggled on the couch watching a movie. And all of a sudden I heard something in the other room, and I'm listening and I'm listening, and the dishwasher was on.
By itself.
Yeah, I mean, there were like 2 dishes in it. You know, there was no way that. So it's been interesting, Suzanne. I feel like my relationship with my father has been better.
That's what
so much better,
Stephanie, because here you broke off for your own health, mental health, emotional health. You broke off the relationship, yet there you are saying, Dad, I just want a sign from you. It's very clear that after his death, you've moved forward with him in a better, more healthy way.
Absolutely. I have felt him so much. I've had so many different mediums and psychics that I'm actually sometimes interviewing. I was interviewing Marla Fries shortly after my father's death, who's a psychic medium. And she goes, oh, your dad's here with us. And it's minute 26 of that video. And you can see in that video, she says that, and this orb of light comes across the screen, and not up or down or diagonal. It like did like kind of like a wave. And she starts laughing. She's, yeah, she's like, did you see that? And I said, oh, I couldn't miss that.
Yeah.
And I just felt, Suzanne, too, I think the thing that was really beautiful to know and to note as well is it's been the pure essence of my father. It's not my dad's personality. It's not whatever his ego structure was. It's this purity of love that just keeps coming through.
And that's who we are underneath the stories. And that's who we are much more aware of being once we leave these bodies behind. The story continues, but in a healthier way. Somebody just asked me last night at our screening in Denver of Wolf's Message, you know, do we continue learning across the veil? Absolutely. Yeah. We learn so much faster here, though, with the opposites and the lessons that we face. And I love that, you know, you come across as this big, bubbly, everything is wonderful life person. And yet, look, we all face challenges. We all have some dysfunction, some wounds, some trauma, and your beautiful books, plural, help people to find that big, fat, juicy life despite them.
Thank you. I mean, and that's my hope. You know, I always hold in my heart that about 20 years ago, I worked, well, more than that now, a little over 20 years, I worked for a school district as a school counselor. And I would teach all the grades about, we do this character building. And I'd get to go into all the classrooms. And I'll never forget walking into this 4th grade classroom. And this little girl, her name was Patty, she said to me, Miss Stephanie, you're always so happy. You're always smiling. And in that moment, the download that I got was to stop and say to her, I just held her little hands and said, you know what, Miss Stephanie isn't always happy. Sometimes Miss Stephanie is really sad. And sometimes she feels really angry. Because I knew, Suzanne, how important it was that she didn't look at me and think, oh, I need to be that. And so I'm going to think that I have to be joyful and happy all the time. I said, I love my job. So you get to see me really happy because I get excited to come in here and see you guys. But the truth is, we have all those emotions, and how important that is, that that's the message we're sharing. You know, I love Jacob Lieberman, who's in my first film. one of the messages he says in the film is When Sparks Ignite. And he says, we're all the same height. We're all the same height. And here he is, this luminary in the world and sharing these beautiful books. And he's also, public speaker. And he shares in that film about having 9 years of panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And just how none of us are exempt. We're all in this real life experience together, and we're all having this spiritual experience together. That's really this duality that we've come here to experience.
So funny you should say that. I just turned in a book to Hay House. It's going to come out next June, called Always Connected. And I tell about my experiences with panic attacks, and Wayne Dyer coming to me after having a panic attack. I just see the web, that we all are connected to the same source. We can find connections almost everywhere when we become aware of them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just beautiful.
It becomes too easy for people to look at the people that seem to have a more blessed life than they do, and we judge our own lives. And I'm really grateful to you coming on today and showing that it's all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Summarize the whole point of the book, if we haven't really grasped it perfectly today.
Okay. Thank you. I really do feel like the book is how we can move away from move away from fear into love. And when we can befriend death, instead of death being something that we fear, then what we do is we move into a relationship with the present moment. Because
I just got grabbed because I said, wasn't that today's message from you guys? And it was.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So please.
Yeah. So, and that's just it, because when we're in this moment, as you know, this moment becomes sacred. This is where our gifts lie. This is where we can connect with people on this side and beyond. Mm-hmm. And so the book is really that, it's really helping us to move through fear and look at all these examples, number one, so that we don't have to fear life or fear death. So we can start having these conversations with one another. Because when I was doing research, it said like 73% of the people polled have had these kind of experiences.
Yep.
But we don't talk about them because people are afraid of being marginalized, or someone's going to think I'm crazy. And instead, for me, it's an opportunity to invite people into the conversation, so we can start talking about, oh yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I've had that happen. And just what a beautiful blessing that is. And we can just open that up. And at the end of every chapter, there's these tapping in exercises, so that as people are reading the book, they can actually do something that helps them then to alchemize it into themselves. So they have this inner alchemy of like, oh, I didn't just read it. Now I'm assimilating it into who I am. And I'm practicing these things so that I too can tune in. So I too learn, how can I better be with, my shadow emotions, or how can I really start having a relationship with death where it's not something that's taboo. That as we start talking about it and we start embracing it, and really that's it. That's what came to me, was that phrase, that death is just the next chapter in our book of eternity. So we can love it and embrace it.
Yeah. And yet a book about death. We've kind of gone all over the map here, but it's really it's a beautiful spiritual book that will inspire people, open them to the possibilities for themselves, entertain them, and it just helps you raise your vibration just reading it, which I feel just being in your presence today. So it's lovely.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Tell us about your documentaries. You mentioned your friend Anna Dara. You hooked me up with her to help get our documentary Wolf's Message out to more people, and she's lovely. And so you must have met her through doing your documentaries. Tell us how people can watch your films.
Yeah. So my first film, which is Igniting the Spark, is actually on Humanities Stream Plus. Okay. So if people are Humanities Stream members, they can see that there. I have another documentary there that is What We Need to Know Now, Living Wisdom for a Changing World.
Good.
And that's a shorter documentary. And Anna Dara and I, we became really close about 3 years ago when she was up with me filming. We had 20 women, 6 international thought leaders, and an all-woman film crew of, her beautiful film crew from Film Nest Studios here in Santa Fe. And it was 3 days of profound transformation, Suzanne. We had women that there was one woman, she was a young woman, barely, I think 40. But she had all these autoimmune disorders and different things where she couldn't stand when we were doing the opening medicine wheel and some of these, beautiful things that we were doing to welcome people into the weekend. And you see her by the end of the film. I mean, she's dancing. She's dancing. I mean, she just lit up. Yeah. And what was beautiful, and what's beautiful, I feel like, about all my documentaries, it's not just what's happening in the room. You also get to see behind the scenes that you're in. We always sit around in a circle in a table, and we call it Lights of the Round Table.
I love that.
And so you get to see the transformation of the actual presenters themselves, and they're talking about how these profound experiences are also impacting them and changing them. And so it came out the same day. I call this the trifecta. June 24th of that year, that was the day my first film came out on Plex Network. My book, Becoming Fierce, was released, and the Becoming Fierce Women's Retreat was filmed.
Wow. It's a lot.
And so, we're actually, Anna and I right now are in post-production. It's going to be a 6-episode series. It's going to be an ongoing series. Oh. And we have the first 2 episodes rough cut. So that's where we're at right now with Becoming Fierce.
So how do people stay in touch with you, learn more? Yeah,
the best way, Suzanne, is if they go to my website, which is stephaniejames.world. So stephaniejames.world, and there they can get links to my book. They can see a trailer for my first film. They can learn a whole bunch about kind of the things that I offer in the world. We have another retreat coming up the end of September, the 19th through the 21st here in Santa Fe, and more to come on that. But that's a great place. And for all your listeners too, there's a free guided meditation. They just put in their email and it will be sent right to them. It's my audio. And because I had so often done this with my clients, people said, could you please record that?
Oh, good.
Yeah. So it's a chakra and very grounding meditation. It's only 10 minutes, but it's one of those things you could listen to in the morning and feel like, okay, I've quieted myself, I'm grounded, and now I'm ready to listen to my inner GPS.
Nice. As I've listened to you, what I keep feeling and hearing from within is that you're showing that this spiritual path isn't necessarily about making our lives better, because we're here for the fullness of it. To me, the spiritual path isn't there's something wrong with us, we have to do something differently. No, it's coming to embrace the fullness of your big, fat, juicy life, warts and all, and finding that sense of connection and purpose. And I know you've just given us some wonderful insights today, opened us up to some higher energy. What did we not cover that you want to leave us with?
I guess the message I come back to so often is what I have written on the film poster for my first film, When Sparks Ignite. And the 3 words under the title say, your period healing period matters, period. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is the essential thing. And not that we ever arrive, just like you said. I think we have to let go of, there's an arrival point and then everything's just smooth sailing. It's not about that. I think, Suzanne, what it's about, though, is that as we all do our own work, we can become clearer conduits for more light, more love, more healing to come down through us and to others. That is the gift that we give the world. And so I love to tell people that we are all golden threads in the tapestry of humanity, and how essential each one of our well-being is. So I'm saying to your listeners, your period healing period matters, period.
You've taught us the importance in this hour of listening. I hope people listened and heard it in the heart. It's a beautiful message to end with. Thank you for bringing your beautiful light onto the show. It was a total joy.
Thank you, Suzanne. Always a joy to be with you.
Yeah. All right, everybody. And it's a joy to be with you. I can feel you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll see you back here next week.